continue to welcome our guests back to the stage. First up, once again, producer Bryan Haas. We're also going to be joined by screenwriter and executive producer Zach Baylin. And also actors Jurnee Smollett. And Nicholas Hoult. And moderating tonight's discussion is Deadline Senior Awards editor Antonio Blythe.
It's 2-2, bottom of the ninth.
That's the same here, Not that we were watching while we were waiting.
So, Bryan, could you maybe kick us off by talking about how you came to this story in the beginning? I believe that, well, I was speaking to Zach backstage, so I cheated a little bit because he clued me into this, but you were interested in Timothy McVeigh to begin with. Is that right?
Well, actually, originally, Zach and I started talking about the world of private militias, and we were interested in, maybe something in TV in that space. And as we were doing more research, not working?
Just more straight on.
Hello?
Yeah, there you go.
There we go. Sorry. So we started doing more and more research into the world of private militias, and we did come across Timothy McVeigh, and we did come across, in research related to that, a mention of this group. And I think I referenced it before we started the movie when we introed it. We were kind of shocked we'd never heard about this story, and just kind of felt like it was, a very sorry, I lost my train of thought there. It was just like a very action-packed movie that also has something to say about the world. So, anyways.
And how did you connect with Jude Law, who's also producing, and then connect with Justin as a director? Why was he a perfect choice? Because I know you'd seen his Palme d'Or nominated film and his other work, but why was he the right guy?
Well, with Justin, Zach and I both had met with Justin before. I had met with him off of his first film, Snowtown, and been a fan of his for a long time. And it just felt like a really good mix of the type of material that he likes. He does a lot of true crime with, just some like really character-driven storytelling. And when Zach and I met with him initially after he read the script, he responded right away, and it really felt like we were all on the same page. In terms of Jude, I think Zach had started talking to Jude about a TV series, and Jude had read the script and had been looking for something in this space, and he was really passionate about this story and wanting to play a role like this. And we were all fans of Jude's and just felt like it would be a really good combination.
Zach, tell me about why this is, it's kind of a throwback 70s kind of a thriller. It's very story-led. It's a kind of film we don't get to see that much anymore, which to me is tragic because I just love this kind of film. Tell me why that appealed to you specifically. And I know you said that, these films are hard to get made. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, can you hear me? That works. I think from the beginning when Bryan and I started talking about it, and then Jude and Ben Jackson, Jude's producer, and Justin, and sort of everyone here, I think that we all had this real affinity for those kind of, Friedkin movies, Sidney Lumet, and those films that were really kind of crackerjack, filmmaker-driven movies that still had a real purpose and were really trying to say something. Those films they're really rare now. I think that they're budgetarily they're hard to make. Like, thankfully, Stewart and AGC got involved and funded it. And but I think movie, we really wanted to try and make a film that had a real cinema about it, but that had something important at the heart of it. And so I think when Bryan and I initially, I remember we were watching this documentary about Timothy McVeigh, and there was this very small clip in that documentary that talks about Bob Matthews and the Order, and that they had pulled off the biggest armored car heist in U.S. history at the time. And I remember Bryan and I talking and being like, this has those sort of elements of that you need to tell a movie. It has these kind of, it had these big action set pieces that we felt like would be incredibly cinematic, that could sort of bolster the substance and the kind of, the more ideologically important parts of the story. And so we hoped that we could maybe like sort of hide the importance of the movie inside of this really entertaining package. And so that's something that we talked about from the beginning, I think.
I feel like this film is so much about connection and the lack thereof, and what happens to people when they're kind of adrift. Because what Matthews does is to manipulate disaffected people, and then Jude Law's character is somewhat isolated and adrift himself. And this is, it's a thriller, but it's about these really close interpersonal relationships. And can you speak a little bit as to how you started to build the framework for that in the screenplay?
Yeah, I think we always looked at it as a bit of a two-hander is not exactly, but like a two-world story, in that there was Bob Matthews in the Order, and then there was Husk and Carney in the police world of it, and that I think it was always meant to be a bit of a story about community and family, and I think the future that these people are trying to build for the next generation, and how they both look at that in very kind of, I think they're both trying to build, but both Husk and Bob are trying to build what they believe the future for their lineage should be, and obviously they have incredibly different ideologies of what that should be. But I think that the idea that at the heart of this is, I think there's a family aspect to it, and we talked about that with Justin a lot, of sort of, I think Justin says, I wish he was here, he's in Australia, but that I think a lot of his films are about family and fractured family, and the need for connection and community, and sometimes how the absence of that can be incredibly toxic, and where you go to look for that connection can end up leading you into some really dark places. And I think that Bob presented this sense of connection to these fractured people with this terrible ideology, whereas Husk was someone who was, had lost the connection to his family in an effort to sort of build a future for them. And so I think we constantly talked about how to sort of bring those sort of parallel stories together.
Yeah, there were a lot of parallels between both Husk and Bob, and even when you think about Jamie being from this place and maybe knowing people that came from there, and Jamie ended up on the side of law enforcement, and some of those guys ended up on the other side, and kind of like, how thin that line is between where you end up in life. So that was definitely something we talked about from the start, and I think Justin, as Zach said, really, he's focused on that a lot in some of his previous movies, and just really wanted to enhance it as much as he could here.
Jurnee, I really love Agent Carney. She's just this force for good. I love that scene in the bar. There's just so much meat to work with. You're talking about, a female FBI agent in that time, in that era. She's a force for good. I know you knew about the Turner Diaries. I read an interview in which you talked about that. Can you talk a little bit about what drew you to this role, and what you kind of did to prepare reading around it?
Thank you for that. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming on a Friday night. They have been real serious too. Like, reading the role of Agent Carney. You know, originally Zach wrote the role as a man, and when they sent me the script, you know, they were thinking about, I think you had already changed it into a woman, yeah? I think so, by the time I read it.
I hope that when we send it to you.
I think so, yeah. You know, I didn't know, I didn't know the story this intimately, no. I knew about the Turner Diaries, you know, of it being a pretty awful ideology, the book. I knew that it had been found on the steps on January 6th, the Capitol. But I didn't know this story, certainly, to this depth that, you know, Zach wrote it to. But I immediately researched black female special agents in FBI and saw, you know, that unfortunately it wasn't until 1976 that the first African American woman was even admitted into the bureau and allowed to hold this position of a special agent. And so I thought, ooh, you know, at the time, during that time, there were over 8,500 special agents in the country. Only 44 were women, and only one was a black woman in 1976. And so I thought, okay, fast forward, not even a decade later, there wouldn't have been many more. So I immediately, you know, reached out to a few former special agents, women of color, and just interviewed them and picked their brain about what was it like to serve in the Bureau, and what was it like working on, you know, maybe not this case, but cases similar to this, cases dealing with hate crimes, or, you know, and I realized how lonely the job was for them. You know, walking into those rooms, sometimes being the only in those spaces, how much the job became so personal for them. And so those were some of the things we talked about, Zach and Justin and I talked about. It was like, well, this is personal for Carney. This isn't just a job, this is her life. You know, she doesn't actually have much of a life outside of this. She's chosen to make this her life. She doesn't have a family. She was the protege under Terry, you know, and yet has risen the ranks and has to be brilliant. She has to be the best. She has to be intelligent, because there's not many of her even, you know, climbing that ladder. And so, yeah, she's not gonna have the tolerance for him fucking up. You know, she's not gonna have the tolerance for him not following orders, because she can't do that. You know, and so this brother-sister tug that they have was so fun to play with Jude. I just adore him. I think he is such a phenomenal actor, one of the greats, and was just so generous to work with on set. But yeah, it did take a lot of research just to try to make Carney like a real living, breathing, fleshy human being.
Well, I loved her. She was like a hero to me in this film.
Thank you so much.
Nicholas, you'd obviously worked with Justin before. How did that existing relationship help you? Because this is an incredible task that you took on, and I wonder how you felt going into it. You know, you not only have to embody this kind of person who in reality had joined a conservative far-right group when he was 11 years old, but you know, you have to get into that kind of a person, but you also have to make us believe that you believe in what you're saying, even when you're being manipulative to others. It's incredibly complex. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you felt going into it and how Justin might have helped you?
Yeah, I'd worked with Justin before, and he called me and said, I've got this script. And he sent it to me, and I read it, and I spoke to him, and I said, well, what made you think of me? And he said, the only thing that could have made me do it, he said, because you're a brilliant actor. But it wasn't necessarily on my bingo card of characters that I wanted to play. But I know from working with Justin before that he has a great ability to show characters very completely in their life, not with empathy, but with some sort of understanding without judgment. And that's a very tricky thing when you're playing a character like this. who he's based his horrible ideology on so many untruths and has gone so far down that rabbit hole that he's committed to a horrible way of life, but also in a very manipulative, kind of not charming, but way of brainwashing people and finding disenfranchised people to prey upon who need family. And that was then very interesting to me to talk. Basically, if it wasn't for Justin, I don't think I would have done it, because there's just too many risks, and it's a character that I think could have easily fallen way down a presentable side, which is not necessarily what's dangerous about him. What's dangerous is the fact that he does show this sense of love and family and protection and all these ideas that if you're lonely and looking for support or some place to be in this world, then it's very easy to fall under his spell. So it's an odd character, because the research and the process of doing it wasn't a nice place to be, but luckily with Zach and with Justin and Jude and everyone, there was this really lovely atmosphere to explore it and try and understand it as best as possible. And that comes very much down from Justin from day one, the way he talks about the characters, but then the way he approaches prep in terms of he sent manifestos to us for things to kind of prep and feel more like the characters and get into them. And so I was working on another movie just before this, but he'd be like, hey, send me a voice note about the guns you own and your beliefs on this and whatever. And so you'd be kind of on your lunch break sitting there kind of trying to understand and express what it is that these characters feel. So that by the time we got to set, you felt like you could just be in the scenes without having to perform anything outside of what the character or the person would be doing. Bob's obviously not well known enough that you have to do an impersonation, but I did find some recordings of him and his speeches and things, so he could listen to those and get specific on certain sounds within his accent, which is always useful when you can be very specific with things like that. And then just trying to understand what that life was for them and that sense of community as well. He the moment we landed in Calgary, he was like, hey, take all of the guys you're with, take them out fishing, take them for dinner, support them, look out for them, and all these things. So it's kind of building an atmosphere that then resembles what ends up on screen, I suppose. Even to the point of, he when I first landed, he was like, I don't want you to meet Jude, I don't want you to talk to Jude, I don't want you to be friends with Jude. And I was like, okay. So we were kept separate for the first 3 or 4 weeks of filming until we meet on screen, and that was the first time we had met. And so that just then builds in something real for you in terms of like the adrenaline and stuff is pumping, because you're like, oh, I'm in a scene, I know it's Jude Law, but it's Terry Husk, and we're doing this, and it becomes something different as well physiologically. So it's all those elements hopefully build up to creating a real 3D person on screen.
Can you tell us about shooting the fire scene in the bathtub? Because I mean, I just can't even imagine the logistics of that and your head state in that scene.
It all felt very safe, to be honest with you. We had a wonderful team down there in terms of SFX and everything, and there were lots of flame bars and smoke, and
we burned the house down.
It was actually during the terrible wildfires up in Canada had been raging for like
Source of the wildfires.
And so there was like, we had to wait for a certain amount of time until it was deemed safe that it could be lit on fire and controlled properly. But then someone for me mentally, I said this to Justin quite early on, and I believe that Bob had planned out his future so far in advance in terms of what he believed his life was about, that he was ready to die right from the beginning of this story. So that moment was almost foreshadowed and expected by him. Although then the reality of it is he's deserted alone, and that's the great flip of this, is you see Husk without his family and Bob surrounded by people, and then suddenly he's alone in a bathtub dying with no one and nothing, and his beliefs have left him. So
Bryan, perhaps you could answer this one, but I believe the shoot was only 32 days. Is that right?
33.
I'm sorry,
That's
33. How did that kind of affect the sense on set? Could you even maybe say it was helpful for the intensity, or was it just a lot?
It was a lot. We knew from day one that we probably needed more time, and we weren't going to have a lot of time on any one day. And you know, it was really important for us, for Justin, to have Adam Arkabaugh, who shot the movie, and they have worked together, and we knew that they have a shorthand and can move quickly. And Justin had also worked with our first AD, Eddie, and the three of them together really understood the pace that we had to work at and how hard it was going to be. I mean, there's a lot of action in this movie for 33 days. So, I mean, really from day one, we kind of like hit the ground running, and just like, we couldn't afford to get behind, because if we got behind, we were not going to get everything we needed. And you know, as Stuart said when we introduced the movie, it's an independent movie. There was no guarantee we were going to get more days on the back end to like make up for the stuff that we didn't have. So, you know, everybody had to be bought in, and so we really appreciate the fact that, you know, from day one, Nick and Jurnee and Jude and Ty, everybody was so ready to go and so bought in, and you know, we were able to work like as quickly as possible to try and make it all happen, because we didn't, you know, as Zach alluded to earlier, you know, there's the engine of the set pieces in this movie, you know, that give it a little bit of a genre feel, even though there's like obviously something more to what the movie's about, and we never wanted to lose that. And you know, getting behind would have, you know, potentially cost us like, okay, well then how are we going to make the fire work? And as Nick alluded to, we had to deal with some natural circumstances just in terms of the weather, and that forced us to shift our schedule around just so that we could try and get the end to shoot it as authentically as possible, is how it actually happened with the fire. And there was a total fire ban in Calgary. So anyways, everybody was bought in from day one, and I think, again, having, you know, Justin and Adam and Eddie, you know, having known each other and worked together, and everybody bought in, you know, just allowed us to like understand what it was from day one, and just everybody made it work, and everybody showed up ready to go every day.
Just to wrap it up, because sadly we're out of time, one more, and this is for all of you or whoever wants to address this. You know, it's shocking how pertinent this film feels now, today, and I wonder what your hope is that audiences take from seeing this film.
I don't know, maybe I'll let everyone answer a little bit, but I mean, I think Bryan and I, and I think all of us, you know, started working on this film a long time ago, where it felt like it was incredibly urgent to make this movie when we first uncovered this story, and it took eight years to make the movie, at least.
Oh my God.
And it feels incredibly urgent for people to see it right now. And so I think that it's, you know, I think our intent with the movie was to try and tell this story as accurately as possible, and allow that to be the relevance of what it says about where we are today, and not just America, but I think all over the world, this extremism and radicalization, and that I think we're all seeing. And so I think that we all felt like it was, as soon as we could get this movie out, we wanted to. And I think that's where we came from.
I guess I'll just say, and I think Jurnee, maybe you've said it this way in the past, like this movie would have been relevant 100 years ago, 50 years ago, it's relevant today, you know, sadly it might be relevant in the future. And, you know, it's one of those stories that, as I mentioned earlier, we weren't aware of, and, you know, when you don't, you know, learn from the history, you're kind of doomed to repeat it, sort of thing. So, you know, it just felt like a story that needed to be told. So.
Very well said. Well, thank you everyone so much. Congratulations on the award.